On today's show, a top 20 NHL mock draft featuring the Nashville Predators winning the lottery and drafting Michael Misa at first overall.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we'll be diving in to the 2025 NHL Draft, just as we've been doing basically every single week for the past couple of months here. But we'll be doing so in a bit of a gamified way today because we'll be doing a mock draft, a top 20 to be exact. I ran a lottery simulator like 18 times on Tankathon just to fully randomize it. And this is what we ended up with. And it featured two teams jumping up spots, and that is the Nashville Predators jumping from third overall to first, and the Seattle Kraken climbing 4 spots to second overall, meaning that the San Jose Sharks and Chicago Blackhawks fall to third and fourth overall, respectively. But before we dig into the entire episode here today, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So let's kick it off right here at number 1 because we have the Nashville Predators moving up in the draft. And this has been a shockingly weak season for the Predators. And there's far from any guarantee that they're even going to be picking in the top 3 come draft day. But at this stage, with them winning the lottery in the simulator, it's a fun little thing to play around with because the lottery does always just throw a wrench into the equation of doing any mock drafts prior to it. So it's kind of fun to just lean into that a little bit and run a sim and just see what happens. And in this sense, I think that the Nashville Predators going at number 1 makes things very interesting here for the first round because it opens things up in a sense that the Nashville Predators need some kind of talent, young talent. There isn't all that much in terms of elite, like top line, top pairing, elite netminder kind of potential in that Nashville Predator system. But what there is a whole load of depth. So what they've been needing in their prospect pool in previous seasons and what they're going to get this year, whether they're picking at number 1 or number 5, is a really high-end piece to add to their prospect pool to be kind of like the blue chip player in the pool. And I think that at number 1, the choice between Matthew Schaefer and Michael Misa, have your pick between those two. I think either one is a fantastic fit in Nashville. Matthew Schaefer could take the torch from Roman Josi in some time and learn from Josi as well and grow his game in Yossi's shadow to eventually overtake him in the depth chart. But if the sense is to go Michael Misa instead, which is what I decided to do for this mock draft, I think it makes things very interesting for the Nashville Predators. There is a limitation of center quality coming through the ranks in terms of young talent right now in the Nashville prospect pool. A lot of recent first-round draft picks have been spent on the wing or at defense. So I think that taking a big swing on a centerman who can be the centerpiece center for a very long time and also learn from players like Steven Stamkos on the way. And Misa's also a big-time shooting threat as a center. So definitely some similarities between his game and Steven Stamkos's, but there's definitely some more defensive upside with Misa. He's a very cerebral, very intelligent and responsible player who works hard every single shift. And I think he'd fit in very well with the team that Nashville's trying to build and really be able to kind of be the player to lead the charge in years moving ahead and taking the torch from this older generation of free agent talents brought in last offseason. But moving on to number 2, we have the Seattle Kraken climbing 4 spots and picking Matthew Schaefer, because if he's available at number 2, I think the Seattle Kraken would be quite enthusiastically jumping to the podium to make that swing, because even though he's missing a bunch of time here at the end of the season, he's one of the youngest players in this draft class, a tremendously mobile left shot defenseman, one of the best movers in the class as well. And he's a transition beast. The lateral agility, the deception The overall manipulative ability on puck is fantastic, and he has that great supportive habits off puck. He's constantly in a good position to also be a passing option for teammates. He works hard. He's a very good rush defender, using his feet to angle out opponents, angle them into the boards, killing plays, picking up the puck, and immediately sending it back the other way. He's a fantastic player, and the Seattle Kraken haven't taken a big swing on a defenseman in the first round just yet in their short history. So I think that Matthew Schaefer would be a fantastic opportunity to change that a little bit, because he is a player to make an exception for. And I know that they have an internal kind of policy to mainly spend their second and later round draft picks on the blue line. But if Matthew Schaefer is available at second overall, you take that swing. At number 3, the San Jose Sharks. And I still think at this point, Porter Martone is a really good fit in San Jose with what they lack, what they need in their lineup. I think if you add a player like Porter Martone, who can play on a top line with a player like Macklin Celebrini and either Will Smith or William Eklund, and then you have a second line with the other of those two skilled playmakers alongside someone like Quentin Musty, Igor Chernyshev. There's a lot of talent here coming through the ranks in San Jose, but getting that one premier power forward frame of player who still has to grow the power forward habits and is quite raw in that sense, which is exciting developmentally because you can still explore the game quite extensively with him. But the soft skill, the dynamic ability to just completely undress defenders and make incisive drives to the net front. This is a player with significant offensive potential, and he has some bite in this game, a little bit like Corey Perry, but he's not a power forward in terms of doing all the small physical details at this point in his progression just yet. He still has to really grow that side of his game. It's more just explosions of violence more than anything else at this stage, but very good fit in San Jose. Even though he's a raw player, San Jose has a long time until they're going to be competitive, so they can wait for a player like Martone to refine a little bit. And I think that at the end of the day, the end product could be just tantalizing. At number 4, the Chicago Blackhawks, falling down to 4th overall, which is less than ideal given the season and how it's gone so far with Chicago, who have been last in the NHL for quite long stretches over the course of this season. But I think at 4th overall, they'd have a really interesting option, and that would be to further extend on their forward depth. And this is a bit contrary to what I think they should do if they're picking in a slot where Matthew Schaefer were available, because if he were available, you go and pick Matthew Schaefer if you are Kyle Davidson and the Chicago Blackhawks. But if he's not available and you don't want to take a swing this early on players like Radim Mrtka or Jackson Smith or Logan Hensler, Anton Frondell, I think, could be a really interesting fit here in Chicago. He's a physical, goal-scoring, defensively responsible center, which is a profile that they lack in a capacity that can just be a very, very clear top 6 one long-term. They went out and picked Sacha Boisvert last season, who has some similar elements, also really hard shot, also not the best skater, a little bit slower, but he plays with energy and physicality, quite defensively responsible. He's a bit more gritty and violent than Frondell is. Frondell is a bit more of a player who can show off some soft skill. He's a way better puck handler than Boisvert is. But I think that with Frondell, you get just that one grade higher of prospect in terms of upside compared to Boisvert. And also, if you can run in the end a second line around Frondell and a third line around Boisvert, and then you have players like Nazar and Oliver Moore moving to the wing and bringing a lot of speed from the wing, I think that a lot of things kind of fall into place there for the Chicago Blackhawks. So I think Frondell will be a really interesting fit there. And with just how much he's been scoring at the professional level with Jurgen in Hockey Allsvenskan this season, I think the hesitation that may have been there earlier on in the season for a lot of scouts with the injury woes, the inconsistent scoring, the very, very, very black hole of an impact in terms of transition. Like, his wingers have to really carry the entire burden of generating chances off the rush, of being dynamic rush attackers, and just getting into the offensive zone with control. So there is a drawback here with Frondell this high, but I think that Chicago could look past that with what else they have in their lineup and other players that can carry that burden for him. But to wrap up the first segment, we have the Buffalo Sabres at number 5. And here's a player I think that they need a kind of player like this. And complete polar opposite of Anton Frondell, You get less defensive ability, but you get pure transition upside. And that's James Hagens falling all the way to number 5. And the Buffalo Sabres, who have gone out and picked cerebral, intelligent, middle six projected centermen for much of the past couple seasons in the first round of the draft. Think players like Noah Östlund and Yuri Kulik and most recently Konsta Helenius. These are all players that don't really have that dynamic skill to project to a top line capacity. James Hagens most certainly does. He's a great playmaker, playing down the middle, but he could also play on the wing. But I mean, ideally, you develop him as a center, playmaking center who can just absolutely attack defenders head on. He's always a threat to fake one way and explode the other. He's a player that really forces defenders to play conservatively, give him some space, because if they play him too tight, play too aggressively, he can make them look pretty bad pretty quickly. And beyond that, I think he's progressed really nicely in the NCAA this season. Definitely still a couple of games here and there that aren't all that good, and he's a bit more raw than perhaps we'd hoped to see this season, with all the hype that was going around for his D-1 campaign, where he was just the absolute best player on the entire NTDP last season. Still, it's been a very good campaign for James Hagens, and I think the Buffalo Sabres would be a great fit in terms of what they lack and the role that he could play in that lineup. And I think he'd be a great compliment to guys like Tage Thompson, Zach Benson, JJ Peterka would be a really good fit as well with James Hagens to match that speed and bring more intensity, a bit more elbow grease as well on the wing. And if you want to pair him with a sniper, I mean, Jack Quinn is also sitting right there. So a lot of options in terms of complementary pieces in that Buffalo forward core that I think would work very nicely with James Hagens. But that wraps things up for this first segment. In the next one, we'll be exploring picks 6 through 13, highlighted by Caleb Desnoyers going to the Philadelphia Flyers at 6th overall. And in the final one, we're going to wrap things up with picks 14 through 20. So a lot to look forward to on today's show. But first, a quick message from our sponsors.
Did you know getting a good night's sleep is the #1 recipe for long-term success in life? I didn't. It took me way longer to realize than I'd like to admit. It was years of tossing and turning. I was always tired. I never felt like I could live up to my potential, but not anymore. Thanks to Bear Mattress. I used their sleep quiz and I matched with the Elite Hybrid. It's perfect for side sleepers like me. Now I wake up energized. I'm getting deeper sleeps and I'm ready to attack the day. No matter how you sleep, Bear Mattress has a match for you with a focus on recovery, cooling, and pressure relief to upgrade your sleep and improve your overall quality of life. Go to bearmattress.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL at checkout for 40% off site-wide. This offer is not available anywhere else. You have to use my promo code on the very last page of checkout to get this discount. That's bearmattress.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for 40% off site-wide. Bearmattress.com, promo code LOCKEDONNHL.
All right, let's keep the episode rolling here in the second segment, kicking it off at number 6 with the Philadelphia Flyers, who have a lot of options here. And I think that this is actually a very difficult spot in the draft to be picking because there are so many very tantalizing picks in terms of if they want to go with a defenseman. Radim Mrtka is a very rangy 6'6" right shot D. If they want to go with massive upside, Roger McQueen is just sitting there. But I think that Caleb Desnoyers would be just too enticing for the Flyers to pass up on. He plays the game of hockey exactly like the Flyers want their players to play. He plays with intensity. He has a decent physical frame that he could definitely still explore a little bit more in terms of integrating a little bit more violence into his play. But high IQ, two-way playmaking center, always just making very good, quick reads. He's always just taking the right route at the right time to support his teammates. I watched him live the other week and was just every single shift he's on the ice. I was like, oh, wow, that looked like an NHL route. Oh, wow, that was exactly NHL pace in terms of how to support your line mates, where to be at the right time. A very easy player to play with, and this has been very evident at also every tournament he's played with Team Canada. He's always had a letter on his jersey. He's always played in the top 6. He's a real locker room guy, but also on the ice. Connects play between his line mates, but is always just an outlet to calm things down and to put the puck in a better position than where he got it. So a lot to like with this player that I think that Philadelphia Flyers, if in back-to-back drafts, they could go with Jet Luchenko and Caleb Desnoyers. Those are two very, very solid top 9 centers for your next decade and a half down the road. But at number 7, the Pittsburgh Penguins, they need talent. They need upside in their prospects. There was a limitation of that in their pool at the moment still. And I think that the biggest thing on upside that is left on the board here is what they will do. And that is going for size, that is going for dynamic ability, and also potential pop with just a lack of viewings and a lack of sample due to injury. Roger McQueen of the Saskatoon Blades in the WHL, a big right shot center / right winger, 6'5", around 200 pounds, and just a really, really slick puck handler, great playmaker, can drive the net. There's a real element of physicality in his game that's been growing with time, perhaps a little bit inconsistently so, but with that frame, he's going to become a slick power forward at the end of the day. And in terms of the runway with him, there is a whole lot to still be explored. He might need a couple years before being an NHLer, but the upside is really interesting. And considering how many teams right now, young teams, are growing around young power forwards as well, like the Montreal Canadiens also in the East around Yuri Slafkovsky got picked at first overall. I think the Pittsburgh Penguins would take the risk on Roger McQueen to try to get a future first-line talent. But at number 8, the Anaheim Ducks, I think Jake O'Brien is a fantastic fit. The Ducks still need more right shot forwards in their top 6. There aren't all that many, at least among the younger generation of talent in that group. Last year, they already added one of those with Beckett Seneca at 3rd overall. But I think that they might want to get one more down the middle to also be able to take draws as a right shot center, while also bring a bit more of a perhaps playmaking element and a creative play driving skill rather than that pure dynamism on puck handling, physicality, running gun offense like Beckett Seneca. And I think that for that fit, Jake O'Brien is the perfect guy. He's a player that has just gotten better and better as the years gone on. Very intelligent, very projectable in how he plays, but still at 6'2" and 176 pounds, still a lot of growing out to do in his frame. And I think that would very much excite the Anaheim Ducks scouting staff. So a player that can still grow a bunch, evolve his game significantly, but is already a very intelligent and very effective point producer at this stage. But moving on to number 9, the Boston Bruins having a top 10 pick here for the first time in ages. And that goes to Radim Mrtka of the Seattle Thunderbirds. Big 6'6", right shot D, rangy, mobile, very intelligent defensively for a team that just traded away Brandon Carlo at the deadline to the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think getting a guy that has higher upside than Brandon Carlo in terms of just potential impact, brings that frame, that range, that mobility, has a decent amount of point production so far in the WHL this season, but isn't the most inherently dynamic, but definitely still a player that has a good pass on him, especially in the breakout, but also in the offensive zone, and has been laying a little bit more deception into his passing game as well as this year has gone on. I think he'd be a great fit with the Bruins. At number 10, the New York Rangers. I think they need a center with what their current group is looking like in the NHL and also what's available in their prospect pool. There isn't all that much talent down the middle among natural centers. So I think like going for a center, maybe reaching slightly on a center is what the Rangers will do on draft day. And that might be Brady Martin of the Sioux Greyhounds. A very, very reliable player with consistent energy, good forechecking game, gets to the net front, gets to the grimy areas, good connective passer, plays with pace, is very projectable with how he plays the game of hockey. And he's been a favorite of ours at Elite Prospects all season long, especially our OHL scout, Lauren Kelly. And the New York Rangers have a lot of talent on the wings, both in the NHL and coming through the ranks. I mean, Gabe Perreault is not all that far away from being an impactful NHL piece, but adding another young center who could be an NHLer within maybe in 2 years' time might be really enticing for the Rangers. But another option that they would have would be to either flip this draft pick for young center or to trade down the draft and maybe get one closer to the 20 range and to get something else, another asset alongside that rather than reaching here at 10th overall. But at 11th, the Detroit Red Wings, I think they're going to pounce on a falling winger that they probably have inside their top 6 on their personal boards, and that is Victor Eklund, also of Djurgården IF in Hockey Allsvenskan, a teammate of Anton Frondell's. And he's been playing professional hockey for consistently for a lot longer than Frondell. He's been a staple in that Djurgården lineup for well over a year at this point, and he's a player that just brings all of that energy, really pacey playmaker, constantly moving his feet, but also just a very intelligent, adaptable, and opportunistic kind of guy that can fall into gaps, fall into blind spots for defenders, and just pounce on rebounds and loose pucks, and just plays a very NHL style game while having a bunch of skill to boot. So he's a guy that I think, I mean, after picking a guy like Lucas Raymond, getting a shot at Victor Eklund would be very, very exciting indeed for the Detroit Red Wings. But moving on to number 12, the Columbus Blue Jackets. I think Jackson Smith would be a very good pick here. He's a very mobile left shot defenseman, 6'3", playing with the Tri-City Americans in the WHL. And he's a player that I've loved watching with that elite level mobility, great rush defending. He's very physical as well. He already has a very fairly filled out frame, and he can just bully opposition at times. He especially did at the CHL Top Prospects game. I remember that very, very fondly. And I think that the Columbus Blue Jackets would look at that package and see a very projectable player who has a lot of runway as well to explore his offensive game. He hasn't played with all that much surrounding skill in Tri-City this year, but has shown flashes of just dynamic, like primary assists off an entry, dangling past one or two defenders, and then just sending a pinpoint perfect pass backdoor onto the tape of a teammate's stick. But there are these elements in his game that can still be explored offensively, but he'd be worth a pick in this range for just his mobility, defensive ability, and transition impact on their own. So a player I've really enjoyed watching. I think the Columbus Blue Jackets, especially after having traded away David Jiricek, I mean, Smith is a left shot defenseman, but just adding one more blue chip defense prospect into the pool here at the draft could make a lot of sense for the Blue Jackets. But to wrap up this second segment, we've got the Utah Hockey Club, and I think Lynden Lakovic would be a really, really nice fit here in this slot. He's another big body, which they love. They've been picking big bodies for quite a couple years now at the draft. Think Maverick Lamoureux, think Daniel Boots. There's a lot of these big wingers coming through the ranks in Utah, and I think that Lynden Lakovic would also be perhaps insulated a little bit by that fact that there wouldn't be the necessity of him being playing the big man role on a line in the NHL someday, because it's the soft skill that makes him special. He's such a creative playmaker with really projectable passing habits, a lot of complexity in his rush patterns, and overall, I think a guy that has also a lot of room to grow still into his frame, into his comfort using his body as a tool to create space and access important areas of the ice. So a lot of habits that still have to grow. So yes, he is raw in that sense, but I think Utah would be willing to be patient, especially considering that they drafted Daniel Booth the other year. I think that he'd be right up their alley. But that wraps things up here in the second segment. In the final one, we'll wrap up the show with picks 14 through 20. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Daylight savings snuck up on us once again, and if you're feeling that lost hour of sleep, 5-Hour Energy has your back. The extra sunshine means more time for fun, but sometimes you need a little boost to power through. Whether you're staying up late watching the NCAA tournament, squeezing in a round of golf after work, or just trying to keep up with your busy day, 5-Hour Energy gives you that quick, refreshing pick-me-up whenever you need it. Whether I'm at a game or traveling, 5-Hour Energy is an easy grab-and-go that keeps me feeling refreshed. Head to 5hourenergy.com to find over 15 flavors to choose from, including watermelon, blue raspberry, and peach mango. You can even build your own 12-pack or 24-pack delivered right to your door. Need one now? Grab a 5-Hour Energy shot at your local grocery store or convenience store. They're everywhere. Stock up today and stay energized. All right, let's wrap up the show here in the final segment, kicking it off at number 14th overall. And the New York Islanders, another team that hasn't had all that many first-round draft picks in recent years, went out and picked Cole Eiserman at 20th overall last season. And I think they're going to go right back into that USA pool this campaign with a right-shot defenseman. Noah Dobson's future is still up in the air, and I think going for a right D who's mobile, projectable, in top four capacity, and it's just very reliable defensively, Logan Hensler makes a bunch of sense. He's progressed his game very nicely at Wisconsin over the course of this season. He plays a fairly low event brand of hockey. He's far from the most exciting player available here on the board, but he's a very projectable NHLer with how he moves, how he defends the rush. I think that there's definitely some defensive upside here to work with too. And offensively, he's mobile enough to walk the blue line, pull defenders east-west, but he doesn't have that inherent dynamic quality really all that often in his game to just break things open or be very comfortable activating below the hash marks in the offensive zone. He's a player that I think is definitely most comfortable playing a two-way transition-heavy game, but being a little bit more conservative with his offensive zone positioning, which I think is a great fit with how the New York Islanders play hockey. At 15th overall, I have the St. Louis Blues taking a swing on Carter Bear, a player that sustained a very unfortunate injury just the other week with a lacerated Achilles, a skate cut back of the ankle, very, very ugly. Out for the season, out for a while, will need a continuous rehab process to get through it. However, a player with just an insanely high motor. He's a violent little ball of dynamic qualities, really great playmaker, constantly moving his feet, constantly challenging defenders, both with his body, but also with his puck skills. And overall, a player I think is going to be a middle six spark plug for a very long time. Very likely also in a second line capacity. I think the playmaking could really elevate him to that like top six caliber, and a guy that I think is a great fit with how the St. Louis Blues like to play hockey in terms of that intensity, and also bring some qualities that they haven't drafted all that much at forward in recent seasons. But at number 16, with the final of the lottery picks, we have the Vancouver Canucks, and I think that Ivan Ryabkin might be an enticing pick for this team. He's a natural center, and having just traded away JT Miller and sure having reacquired Philip Hedl, I think that picking a center would be relatively interesting for the Vancouver Canucks, but a lot of the centers have already gone off the board at this stage. There's a couple other interesting ones left, like Cole Reshny and Jack Nesbitt and Bill Zonin, among a few others like Will Smith, but I think that what they will do perhaps is Ivan Ryabkin, who's been branded as a playmaking centerman, but has lacked some dynamic qualities this season, but still a guy who's scoring a lot of goals in the USHL, and these are all coming off of very intelligent plays and exploiting defenses, also finding those USHL weaknesses very acutely and scoring because of that. His goals aren't the most projectable with how they're currently happening in the USHL, but he's still finding his footing with the North American game. But overall, a player I think where there are definitely some question marks, but the Vancouver Canucks I think will be very enticed by a natural center who could win them some draws, and it also has a lot of runway in terms of evolving his game with an increased motor, with a bit more spark underneath his feet, and also working on his skating and explosiveness a bit. There's a lot of runway with this guy. But then we have at 17th and 18th overall, two back-to-back picks for the Montreal Canadiens. It's their own and the Calgary Flames one, which they got in that Sean Monahan trade as a cap dump a couple years ago. A lot has changed in Sean Monahan's career since that moment. But the Habs, with these picks, I think, are going to go for one forward and one defenseman. I think they could definitely still use one more right shot defenseman in their system, and there's a very interesting one available in this range. But first, I think they're going to take a swing on a homegrown, dynamic, goal-scoring winger. That's Justin Carbonneau, who plays just north of the Montreal Island in Blainville-Boisbriand, and he's been scoring for fun. He's like second or third in the entire QMJHL in scoring at the moment, and he is a player with just high-end skating, high-end handling, high-end shooting, high-end passing abilities, but consistency and maturity and habits and frustration bleeding into his game have all been core tenets of how his season has gone. So there are definitely some question marks. However, the upside, the potential, the raw skill, very, very, very good. And he's homegrown. I think the Montreal Canadiens would love to take a swing on that kind of upside at the draft. And on top of that, also just adding another right winger with players like Brendan Gallagher and Josh Anderson, who are going to be aging out in the next couple of seasons. I think that that would be very enticing for Kent Hughes and co. But then at right shot defense, I think Blake Fiddler from the Edmonton Oil Kings would be a fantastic fit for the Habs. He is another very mobile, transition-dominant defense in both directions. He is so comfortable carrying the puck, challenging checkers, beating them one way or the other with shoulder checks. He's quite deceptive on puck and just very intelligent with his overall on-puck transition sequences, and a very good passer. I like his breakout game quite a bit, and with that high-end mobility, also brings quite a bit of physicality in the big right shot frame. And that rush defending ability literally made my colleague Hattie Kalakash had utter expletives at the Hlinka Gretzky last summer at that tournament, because it was just so dominant, shutting down everything down that flank for the USA. So a player that I've loved watching this season, very physical, very mobile right shot defenseman that fits exactly with how the Montreal Canadiens want to play the game of hockey defensively, and brings that mobility and activation ability in transition rather than the offensive zone. He's less dynamic in the offensive zone, but he brings that off the rush, which I think would also fit in wonderfully with that fluid Habs system. But to wrap up the show, we have two more Canadian teams picking at 19th and 20th, and those are the Ottawa Senators and Calgary Flames. And for the Ottawa Senators, I think that they might be interested in picking a young center who can bring some physicality, perhaps, to the equation. And for that reason, I have them going with Jack Nesbitt out of the OHL, a big-bodied centerman who can play the net front role very comfortably. He's at about a point a game this season. Pretty good production that's been ramping up over recent months. And overall, I think the style of player that Ottawa wants in their middle six. And they don't really have any very promising centers with top 9 upside in their system who aren't already in the NHL today. You have, of course, your Shane Pintos and Ridley Greggs and Tim Stutzles, but beyond that in the system, there's a bunch of guys with maybe fourth line upside, but no one to really take control of perhaps a third line center role, and Jack Nesbitt could be tailor-made for that. Alternatives for that would be maybe Bill Zonin out of the QMJHL and the Hawaii Huskies, or if you want to go less physical and maybe a bit more playmaking, Cole Reshny could also be an interesting option. But to wrap up the show, the Calgary Flames, with the draft pick that they traded for, I think they're going to stick in their own backyard, picking from the Calgary Hitmen, Benjamin Kindel, a dynamic playmaking forward who has just been driving the offense all season long alongside of Oliver Tulk. There with the Hitmen, it's been a two-man show offensively all season on that team, and a lot of that has been driven by Kindel's intelligence, complex playmaking, the deceptive qualities in his passing game, the complex rush patterns, and just that chemistry that he's built with Tulk this season. It's been a real joy to watch, and I think that he'd be a great fit with the Calgary Flames and also bring a level of playmaking into the top 6 that I think that their prospect pool could use an injection of. But that wraps things up here for us today. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, you can head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steel break down everything fantasy hockey related that you could possibly wish for, and where you can learn to build a competitive and sustainable roster to fulfill your fantasy hockey dreams. And if you're watching on YouTube, please do make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below of what you thought about this mock draft. Which players do you think that your team should be picking on draft day? What did I get wrong? What did I get right? I'd love to hear from you down below, but that wraps things up here for us today. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I'm your host, Sebastian High. I hope to catch you tuning in again very, very soon.